Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy these stories and want to support the channel, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every like, every comment, and every subscription really helps a small channel like this reach more people through the YouTube algorithm. I'm still new to YouTube, and your support means more to me than you probably realize. So, let's get started. Imagine someone you know. Someone intelligent, someone kind, someone people trust, maybe a nurse, a teacher, a social worker, a parent. The kind of person who volunteers to help others, the kind of person who believes people deserve fairness, equality, and compassion. Now imagine that same person boarding a plane to a remote settlement hidden deep within the jungles of Guyana, leaving behind their home, their friends, everything familiar, believing they were helping build a better world. Many of them never came home. When most people hear stories about cults, they tell themselves a comforting lie. Those people must have been weak. They must have been gullible. They must have been different from me. Because if that's true, then we're safe. But what if intelligence doesn't protect us? What if some of the qualities we admire most, curiosity, idealism, compassion, the desire to understand complicated systems, can also make us vulnerable under the right circumstances? Because the story you're about to hear isn't just about a cult. It's about human nature. It's about blind spots. It's about the uncomfortable gap between who we think we are and who we might become. And it raises a terrifying question. If you had been there, would you have recognized what was happening before it was too late? Or have walked the exact same path? One of the most persistent myths about destructive groups is that they recruit people who don't know how to think. History tells a far more uncomfortable story. Among the followers of Jim Jones were teachers, nurses, social workers, parents, veterans, business owners, college graduates, people who had spent their lives helping others, people who were respected by those around them. Many joined because they genuinely believed they were helping build a better world. To understand why, we have to return to America in the 1960s and 1970s. It was a country wrestling with racial inequality, poverty, political division, and profound social change. Many people felt disillusioned. Institutions they had trusted appeared to be failing. Leaders had disappointed them. Promises had gone unfulfilled. And then, someone appeared offering something different. Jim Jones spoke about equality. He publicly condemned racism. He organized food programs. He helped elderly members of the community. He offered support to people who often felt forgotten. At least, that's how many people experienced him in the beginning. At first glance, this didn't look like danger. It looked like hope. That's the part people rarely understand. Destructive groups rarely introduce themselves as destructive. They introduce themselves as solutions. They don't begin by demanding obedience. They begin by offering purpose. And purpose is one of the strongest forces in human psychology, especially for people who care deeply about making a difference, people who want to contribute, people who want to understand the world, people who want their lives to mean something. So let me ask you something. If someone offered you the chance to fight injustice, to help vulnerable people, to belong to a community that shared your values, would you walk away immediately? Or would you stay just a little longer? Because that's where this story truly begins. The first mechanism doesn't feel dangerous. In fact, it feels wonderful. Researchers who study high control groups often describe this process as love bombing. You walk into a room. People know your name. They remember details about your life. They listen carefully. They praise your compassion, your intelligence, your potential. They tell you that you're special, that your talents matter, that you finally found people who truly understand you. For many people, this experience can be profoundly emotional. Not because they're weak, not because they're naive, but because being genuinely seen is a powerful human need. Many people spend years feeling misunderstood. They learn to simplify themselves, to hide certain parts of who they are, to avoid seeming too intense or too different. Then suddenly, they encounter a community that says, "No, we see you. We value you. We've been waiting for someone exactly like you." That doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like home. And that's why it's so effective. Because the need to belong isn't a weakness. It's human. No degree eliminates loneliness. No IQ replaces connection. No amount of critical thinking removes our desire to be understood. And sometimes, that's exactly where the story begins to change. But acceptance alone isn't enough. There was another reason many people stayed. The ideas themselves. Many high-control groups offer more than emotional support. They offer explanations, complex systems, a framework for understanding the world. They tell you why society is broken, who is responsible, how history really works, how the future can be changed. For curious and intellectually engaged people, this can feel magnetic, like discovery, like uncovering hidden truths, like becoming part of something larger than yourself. People rarely think, "I'm joining a cult." They think, "I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm helping." And slowly, almost invisibly, investment begins. Time, money, identity, relationships, dreams. The more someone invests, the harder it often becomes to leave. Because leaving doesn't simply mean walking away. It can mean questioning years of choices, admitting that a story you've built your life around might not be entirely true. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we experience when reality conflicts with deeply held beliefs. And human beings are remarkably skilled at reducing that discomfort. Sometimes by changing course, and sometimes by finding new ways to explain the contradiction. Intelligence doesn't necessarily protect us from this process. In some cases, our ability to generate explanations can make difficult questions easier to avoid. Until one day, we no longer ask, "Is this right?" Instead, we ask, "How can I make this make sense?" And those two questions can lead us to very different destinations. Here's the question that haunts almost everyone who learns about Jonestown. If these people were intelligent, if they had families, if warning signs eventually emerged, why didn't they just leave? Because by the time those warning signs became impossible for many people to ignore, leaving no longer felt simple. Most people imagine that destructive groups transform overnight. One day, everything is normal. The next day, everything is extreme. But reality is rarely that dramatic. Reality moves in inches. The first compromise doesn't feel like a compromise. Maybe it's attending one more meeting. Maybe it's donating a little more money. Maybe it's defending the group during an uncomfortable conversation with a friend. Maybe it's canceling plans because the mission suddenly feels more important. Each individual decision feels reasonable, temporary, understandable. And that's exactly why people often fail to notice the pattern. It's sometimes compared to walking down a staircase in the dark. You don't realize how far you've gone because each step feels small. If someone had asked many members of the People's Temple during the early years, would you one day leave your home, move to another country, and place your future in the hands of one leader? Many of them probably would have laughed. They would have said, "No, absolutely not." But nobody asked them to do that on day one. They were asked to take one small step, then another, until eventually, turning around felt harder than moving forward. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this. At every stage, many of them believed they were making the right decision. Not because they had stopped thinking, not because they had abandoned reason, but because they were using the same intelligence, the same values, and the same problem-solving abilities that had guided them through life to make sense of the path they were already on. And that's what makes Jonestown so frightening. It asks us to consider the possibility that under the right circumstances, thinking people can slowly become trapped, one reasonable decision at a time. There is another mechanism that rarely receives enough attention. The promise of being different, of being chosen. Not necessarily in a religious sense, but in an intellectual and moral one. Many high-control groups create a powerful story. Most people are asleep. Most people don't understand. Most people don't care. But you see deeper. You understand what others cannot. You notice what others ignore. You care when others don't. You belong among the few who truly get it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Part of that message can feel genuine. Some people really do think differently. Some people really do notice problems others overlook. Some people really have spent years feeling disconnected from those around them. That's one reason this mechanism can be so effective. Because manipulation rarely begins with a complete lie. It often begins with a partial truth. A truth wrapped around an agenda. Researchers who study high-control groups have observed that many reinforce a sense of uniqueness and a special identity. The group doesn't simply give you community. It gives you a version of yourself that feels extraordinary. And once your identity becomes deeply tied to the group, criticizing the group can begin to feel like criticizing yourself. Questioning the group's beliefs can feel like questioning your own character. Leaving the group can feel like losing who you are. And that's a terrifying thing for any human being to face. Because sometimes the hardest belief to let go of is the one we've built about ourselves. Eventually, more than 900 members of the People's Temple relocated to Guyana, a remote settlement surrounded by dense jungle. To outsiders, it seemed unimaginable. Why would educated people willingly move so far away? But for many members, this decision didn't feel irrational. It felt consistent. They believed they were building a better society, a place they hoped would be free from discrimination, a community built on equality, shared sacrifice, and purpose. A fresh start, the culmination of years of commitment. By then, many had already invested everything. Their savings, their reputations, their friendships, their trust, their sense of identity. To admit they had made a mistake would mean confronting a painful possibility. What if the cause they had defended for years wasn't what they thought it was? What if the person they trusted wasn't who they believed him to be? What if all of those sacrifices had led them here? Human beings often struggle with that kind of realization, not because we're foolish, not because we lack intelligence, but because accepting painful truths can require dismantling the story we've built about ourselves. And few things are more difficult than looking back on years of conviction, years of sacrifice, years of hope, and saying, "I was wrong," especially when the cost of being wrong feels unbearable. There is a detail about Jonestown that people rarely talk about, and in many ways, it may be the most unsettling part of the entire story. It isn't what happened at the end. It isn't the headlines. It isn't the documentaries. It's this. Many people inside Jonestown still saw themselves as the good guys. They believed they were trying to do the right thing, to protect their families, to fight injustice, to remain loyal to the people they loved, to stay committed to a cause they had once believed could change the world. History has trained us to divide people into simple categories: heroes and villains, victims and perpetrators, good people and bad people. But reality is rarely that neat. Very few people wake up in the morning and decide to become part of something destructive. Most people wake up believing they are doing what is right. And that's exactly what makes this story so difficult to process. Because it forces us to confront a possibility most of us desperately want to reject. The possibility that under enough pressure, under enough fear, under enough emotional investment, ordinary people can adapt to extraordinary circumstances. Not all at once, but gradually. Researchers who study social influence and human behavior have spent decades examining this process, and many have arrived at a similar conclusion. Human beings are often far more shaped by context than we'd like to believe. Painfully, we imagine ourselves as fixed, independent, immune to influence. But our environments shape what feels normal. They shape what feels acceptable. They shape what feels necessary. And if that environment changes slowly enough, our definition of normal can change with it. That doesn't mean people lose their morality overnight. It means morality begins negotiating with fear, with loyalty, with belonging, with survival. And sometimes, those negotiations happen so quietly that people don't recognize them until they look back years later, if they ever get the chance to look back at all. And perhaps that's the most frightening lesson Jonestown has to offer. Not that evil always looks monstrous, but that ordinary people can slowly learn to call the unimaginable normal. When people hear stories like this, they often ask the wrong question. How could they be so foolish? But perhaps the better question is this: how does intelligence actually work? Because intelligence doesn't automatically protect us from manipulation. It doesn't grant immunity from influence. It doesn't eliminate bias. Intelligence is a tool, and tools can be used in different ways. A highly intelligent person may identify patterns, construct arguments, solve complex problems, notice contradictions. But the same abilities can sometimes be used to defend beliefs we don't want to abandon, to justify, to rationalize, to reinterpret, to protect our identities from uncomfortable truths. Researchers sometimes describe this as motivated reasoning, our tendency to use our reasoning abilities not only to discover what is true, but also to defend what we already want to believe. The very skill that helps someone succeed in academia can sometimes help them explain away warning signs. The same creativity that drives innovation can generate endless reasons to stay. The same determination that builds businesses can become unwavering commitment to a destructive cause. Intelligence can make us more capable, but capability and wisdom are not the same thing. Wisdom requires something intelligence alone cannot guarantee: humility. The willingness to say, "I may be wrong. I may not see the full picture. I need perspectives beyond my own. Because the most dangerous sentence a person can say is not, "I don't know." It's this: "That could never happen to me." Because certainty, not ignorance, is often where our blind spots begin. So what can reduce the risk? Not paranoia, not isolation, not assuming that everyone is dangerous. Awareness. The first step is learning to recognize patterns, instead of appearances. High-control groups rarely look exactly like the stereotypes we expect. They don't always wear uniforms. They don't always isolate themselves in remote locations. Sometimes they present themselves as self-improvement programs, professional communities, political movements, online groups, or even social circles. So pay attention to behavior. Is there an unquestionable leader? Are doubts consistently discouraged? Are outsiders automatically portrayed as enemies? Is disagreement treated as betrayal? Are people encouraged to distance themselves from those who care about them? None of these signs prove anything on their own, but they may be worth paying attention to. Second, listen to people outside the group. If several independent people who genuinely care about you express concern, don't dismiss them immediately. You don't have to agree, but it's worth investigating why they feel that way. Third, protect your right to ask questions. Healthy communities can tolerate disagreement. Healthy leaders can admit mistakes. Healthy relationships allow people to leave without fear. If curiosity becomes dangerous, something may be wrong. Fourth, pay attention during periods of transition. Loss, divorce, moving, graduation, illness, grief, loneliness. These moments don't make us weak. They make us human. And human beings often seek certainty when life feels unstable. Knowing that about yourself isn't fear, it's self-awareness. Finally, you may find it useful to learn about the BITE model developed by Steven Hassan. Behavior control, information control, thought control, emotional control. It's not a perfect tool, and it isn't a clinical diagnostic test, but many people have found it helpful as a framework for evaluating influence and control, especially when emotions are running high. Before we end this story, I want you to go back to the beginning. Back to the person we imagined together. The nurse, the parent, the person who cared deeply about other people. The person who wanted to make the world a little better than they found it. For most of this video, it has been easy to think of them as someone from another time, another place, another life. Someone trapped inside a tragedy that belonged to history. But what if that's the wrong way to look at it? Because the most disturbing lesson of Jonestown isn't that human beings can be manipulated. We've always known that. The most disturbing lesson is how ordinary the people were. They weren't monsters. They weren't caricatures. They weren't people searching for someone else to think for them. They loved. They hoped. They worried about their families. They dreamed about fairness. They wanted meaning. They wanted community. They wanted to belong to something larger than themselves. The same things almost all human beings want. And maybe that's the hardest truth to accept. The distance between us and them may be much smaller than we'd like to believe. History feels safer when we imagine that terrible things only happen to certain kinds of people. People who are weaker, less intelligent, more vulnerable, different. But history rarely works that way. Sometimes the difference isn't intelligence. Sometimes it isn't morality. Sometimes it isn't strength. Sometimes it's timing. It's meeting the wrong person during one of the hardest periods of your life. It's searching for purpose while grieving. It's craving connection after isolation. It's wanting certainty when the world suddenly no longer makes sense. The tragedy of Jonestown didn't begin in the jungle. It began with people trying to build a better future. It began with compassion. It began with idealism. It began with hope. And somewhere along the way, those deeply human qualities became entangled with fear, with control, with loyalty that no longer allowed questions, until many people could no longer recognize where the dream had ended and something far more dangerous had begun. Perhaps that's why stories like this matter, not because they allow us to judge the past, but because they encourage us to examine ourselves, to ask difficult questions. What beliefs would I defend even when evidence changes? What communities shape the way I think? Who can challenge my assumptions? Do I still have the freedom to doubt? Would I recognize manipulation if it arrived wrapped in kindness? Would I recognize it if it promised meaning? Would I recognize it if it looked exactly like what I'd been searching for? Maybe you started this video expecting a story about cults, but this was never only a story about cults. It was a story about human nature, about connection, about purpose, about the blind spots every one of us carries. And perhaps the wisest people are not those who believe they're immune to influence. Perhaps the wisest people are those who understand that they are not. People who remain curious about their own certainty. People who welcome questions. People who allow others to challenge them. Because awareness doesn't make us perfect. If this video made you think differently about Jonestown or about human nature itself, please consider supporting the channel. Leave a like, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for spending your time here. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and never stop asking questions.